Welcome in. This is The Spread. I'm Cameron Tarrant. That's SoCon John Hooper. As always, back again this week. Finally going to get into some good old-fashioned football talk, John. We've kind of talked, the past few episodes just of the more trendy topics around sports as a whole and things like that, what's kind of going on current events-wise. But now we're going to get into what we really enjoy talking about, and that's the meat of the game of football, and kind of do our preseason outlooks for different conferences and teams and such. And we'll start this week with the SoCon, John, because you are SoCon John. So we'll dive into all of the Southern Conference teams, take a look back at what some of them did last season, kind of dive into what we expect from each team this year, and at the end of the show, we'll kind of break down our rankings of where we think the Southern Conference will end up looking like by the end of the year. Hopefully, football will be played as scheduled come September. So, but we're going to go ahead and just start diving into this, John. I'm really excited to finally get back to some actual football talk.
Yeah, it's refreshing that things have thankfully calmed down in our nation a little bit this week. So. Hopefully the COVID numbers will go down a little bit, especially in our state. But early this week, I think I saw a story on Western Carolina's website about student athletes going to report in July, and so you're starting to see some of those stories, creep onto different schools' websites, and that always makes me feel optimistic and positive about the season coming up, because I think it's got a chance not only in the SoCon but around the nation to be another fantastic football season.
Yeah, last year on the show we talked about it each week. Last season SoCon, year was fantastic. I mean, it just were so many different storylines, surprising things happening within the league itself. And then ultimately you had a team like Wofford that gets back, to the, winning the conference, getting back to the playoffs. However, it was not a good year for the Southern Conference come the FCS playoffs last season.
Yeah, it really was not. We were talking about before the show, the first time since 1986 that both teams had lost in the opening round. Of course, that year Appalachian State lost to Nicholls State, and then Furman lost to a very good Eastern Kentucky team at Paladin Stadium. So, it's a surprise. It's not necessarily a surprise that there's been some drop off with Appalachian State and Georgia Southern moving on to the Sun Belt, but there is a surprise when you see a team not making at least the quarterfinal or even the second round of the FCS playoffs. That's a real shocker. And for Wofford to lose the game 28-21 at home was a little bit surprising. Not necessarily surprised that Furman lost, just in the way they lost, was a shocker to me. But, you had the weather delays in that game, and it was kind of there was a series there of about 6 minutes where I think Austin Peay scored 28 points, and it just snowballed all at once. And I think that it's bizarre you see that in a football game, but it's really strange with the weather and everything that happened that day. I think it was just not in the cards for the Paladins, but certainly expected them to put up a little bit better performance than a 42-6.
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to have seen them better. 2020, maybe this is a year that they can build off last year, have a better season this year. We'll just kind of see. Furman does start, though, as the highest-ranked team in the SoCon, as of the preseason top 25 polls in the FCS. They start at number 14 in the preseason polls. Then you have the Citadel that's also in the polls at number 21. So two SoCon schools making it there in the top 25, John.
Yeah, and not surprised that Furman or the Citadel would be in there. little surprised that maybe Wofford didn't creep in to the poll. Um, those are the three teams I think that probably right now I would say that are competitors for the championship in the regular season. But I think that certainly that the Citadel with what they have returning and Brandon Rainey at quarterback set a school record last year for touchdowns in a season. And then you have Alex Ramsey, who
Yeah.
transfers over from VMI and was a candidate for the Walter Payton Award last year, which is obviously given to the best player in FCS football. And not only is he a vital asset as a running back, but he catches the ball well out of the backfield, and he's a great athlete. So, it's so interesting to me that here's a guy that played for VMI and got his degree from VMI, but yet he's going to go to the Citadel, which is a rival that runs, a different offense altogether. But he's likely going to put up similar to better numbers in the Citadel's offense than he would even in VMI's offense,
Right.
which was catered towards him to begin with, but featured more of a passing attack.
All right, John, now we're going to move on to the three teams in this state here in South Carolina. We'll start with the defending champions, the Wofford Terriers. Obviously, they're going to have to replace quarterback Joe Newman. They got some other guys on that, other holes that they're going to have to fill and replace players. Wofford always seems to be right there, right at the top, either one or two. They're always kind of right there every year competing for conference championships. No surprise. I mean, yes, they're going to have to kind of replace some things and some players, but wouldn't be shocked to see them right back up there again this year.
No, and we talked about it. I mean, the grad transfer thing. I guess you got two of the offensive linemen, Josh Berger and Blake Gerasati, who are gonna, understandably, for me at least, I don't have a problem with a guy wanting to have a chance at, big time, big level football after, they've won, three championships in a row, or helped in that, I guess. So I don't have any problem with that, but it's going to be interesting to see because Wofford, it's been a program that's always manufactured both defensive linemen and offensive linemen over the years. And so maybe that's an area where they can afford to lose a couple guys, that are really talented, and why you never want to. I think Wofford's always got those guys waiting in the wings to kind of step up and step into those roles. And, I think that the question for me is more replacing quarterback Joe Newman. How are you going to go about that on offense, and what is their offense going to look like? I know early last year, Coach Conklin wanted to do some things more diverse than maybe had been in the past under Mike Ayers. Wanted to maybe throw a few more passing wrinkles into the fold, and it didn't work out early, so they went back to their bread and butter and kind of finished out the season. I'm wondering if a guy like Peyton Derrick, who transfers in from Appalachian State, with a little bit more, he's a little bit more passing savvy. I think it's a guy that, he's been up at App for a year, played some up there when their quarterback got injured. So I wonder if Peyton Derrick didn't step in, and he might be the fit to what Coach Conklin is looking for as far as a very well versed passing threat, as well as a decent enough running threat to be a threat in the running game. So we'll see.
Well, and Wofford gets started right away. First game of the year, they come to Greenville, take on Furman. And then right after that, they head back to Spartanburg to take on the Citadel. So they're getting the two South Carolina SoCon teams out of the way week 1 and 2.
I would say, well, I mean, that's probably two of the tougher SoCon games you're going to have. And if you're going to have them, why not have them right away?
Yeah.
The only problem with, that is I always look at that first game and you're like, wow, we get, so and so gets to play so and so in the first week. But then, if App State plays, uh, Louisiana Lafayette in the first week, and which would be a conference game, two best teams in that league, we were like, great, we catch them early. But then you also were like, well, they've had an off season to prepare for us too. So
Yeah.
I think the same mentality is like that, and probably, I mean, I would imagine, while they wouldn't say this, Furman probably has a little bit of an axe to grind maybe after last year, and having all the marbles there for the SoCon championship, and Wofford just really winning the game with its maturity, and
Yeah.
it's I would call it just methodical, savvy offensive play calling that was able to get the victory on that day. And boy, what a job by their defense. And they lose a guy like Thad Mangum, who didn't play, I don't think, in that game last year against Furman, but on defense, he's going to grad transfer as well. So that's going to be a huge hole to fill on their defense. But they've got a guy like Michael Mason, the defensive end, that had such a fine freshman season, that can step in, and he can really be a force as a pass rusher. And it's going to be interesting. I think their secondary is pretty good. So I think they'll be good again defensively. I think they'll be pretty good. I think the real question for Wofford is, how fast if it's Peyton Derrick, if it's, the Wyrick kid, whoever it is that replaces Joe Newman, how quickly they adjust. And will there be two quarterbacks used? I've seen in the past under Mike Ayers and both Conklin, they have been able to implement a second guy in there for a drive or two each half, and kind of, offset, complement, both quarterbacks will complement each other. And it'll be interesting to see if he'll use two guys this year, and Peyton Derrick and obviously Wyrick, who I think is
Right.
another talent.
And for Wofford, man, they're just making the rounds of South Carolina teams this year. They're not playing Clemson, but they've got South Carolina State out of conference. They've got South Carolina out of conference. I mean, they're just playing everybody in the state, it seems like, here in 2020.
That's called a smart AD that's budgeting well. So
Yep.
don't have to leave the state all too often, to go to too many, places. I think that Wofford's been, it's really strange. This is the best run that Wofford's had. 3 straight championships, 4 straight playoff appearances. So while we think of them as, having had some great years when Eric Breitenstein was there, and certain other guys, this has really been like a golden age for them, so to speak, a golden generation of players, and just a time when they need to capitalize by getting to that. They haven't been able to get past that quarterfinal game in the FCS playoffs. Most of the time it's been North Dakota State in the way. And so they're going to have to figure out a way to be, if they're going to be, the time might be now. I don't know how long that window of opportunity will be there.
Right.
But to be able to get, into the playoffs, and not only just win a game or two, but to kind of make a deep run and try to get past that quarterfinal round, and been somewhere that they've only been once before. I think the semifinals in 2003. So I'll be interested to see if, because I think part of when they played a North Dakota State in the game a few years ago, it sort of, to me, it was a microcosm, or an indicator of where maybe the Missouri football conference is,
Yeah.
in comparison to where the SoCon is. And it's, athlete for athlete, speed, everything. And so, if Wofford or Furman or whomever is going to carry the torch for this league, they're going to have to get to a place to where they can be a threat for a national championship, because right now these teams are probably a threat to only win 1 or 2 games, unfortunately, in the
Yeah.
playoffs.
Yeah. Down in Charleston, the Bulldogs started off the season really well last year in 2019. Had a win over Georgia Tech that a lot of people talked about. Brandon Rainey, great quarterback. He'll be coming back for the Bulldogs. We talked about Alex Ramsey transferring from VMI, coming down to join the Citadel this year. Last year, finishing end of the season though, they had the great win over Furman in Greenville, but then kind of stumbled down the stretch. Ended up finishing 4-4 in conference, tied for fourth, and went 6-6 overall to end their 2019 campaign. A great start, but kind of disappointing on how they finished 2019.
Yeah, when I look back at those games, I guess it was Towson, maybe in Elon, early in the year last year. Obviously, we thought those teams would pan out a little bit better in the CAA. So looking back on it, at the time, I think Towson was in the top 10 in the country. They lose a tough one to them. And that was a game that, if you get one of those two games later in the year, that looks a lot better.
Yeah.
So, I think the Citadel, the win over Georgia Tech, the problem with getting a win like that is you end up expending so much to get that win in terms of, Brandon Rainey was not 100% for a couple of weeks after that. I think, in fact, the next week the backup Murdaugh started against Charleston Southern. So, and I think that I don't know exactly at what point he was ever feeling, 100% again, but
right.
Certainly the loss at Sanford was one that was a game I think that the Citadel blew a lead. And I found that, if you look at the Chattanooga game too, they blew a big lead in that game. So it was a case of a lot of times in these losses, they had leads which they just squandered away in the end. And that to me is probably more of a lack of maturity as a football team and being used to winning as much as anything. I don't think it was a talent issue or anything like that. I think it was just a lack of maturity. And I think that's something they will have this year. And I think one of the more underrated players that they have is wide receiver Raleigh Webb. He's a guy that averaged like 27 yards a catch last year, a guy that is just, he's actually a guy like him is what ETSU needs as far as a big pass play threat. And he delivered seemingly time and time again on just big plays in games. And he was a guy that was a literal threat to take it the distance each time he had his hands on the ball. And I think he's going to be a big factor for them. I think they've got a very good offensive line. So defensively, they have arguably the best player in the league and linebacker Willie Eubanks III. So a lot of pieces to kind of compete for a championship this year return in Charleston, and a chance for them to have a big year.
Well, and if they can play like they did, John, in the game that me and you stood out there in the cold and the rain there at Furman, where the Citadel,
troopers that day.
I mean, the Citadel just absolutely dominated that game from start to finish. I mean, Furman had their chances. A lot of, boneheaded mistakes by the Paladins cost them. But, I mean, the Citadel just, played one of their better games. They did have a couple turnovers, but all in all, just controlled that game, especially the second half, just kind of breaking the will of that Furman defense. And if they can play like that consistently throughout 2020, yeah, I agree with you. I think they are a good shot at winning the league.
Yeah, and if you'll remember in that Furman game, they even weathered like two or three first half turnovers.
Yeah.
And so even though they were turning the ball over, they were still able to turn Furman away. And I think that was impressive to me. But also, what was impressive is it's kind of like you knew what they were going to do in the second half, and they were just, they were blocking well. I mean, it wasn't the greatest traction in the world on that field, and just a horrible day condition-wise. But I thought their running game looked very, very good, and their blocking was very, very good all day. And I thought not only were they the better team that day, they were the more physical team that day, and kind of they played like a team to me with their backs against the wall. And they couldn't really afford to lose at that point in another conference game, and they played like that. And unfortunately, later on down the year, when they played Chattanooga, they needed that same kind of finishing ability to finish a ball game out, and they couldn't do it against the Mocs.
Yeah, yeah. They interesting, good start for them though. They have to play Elon and then Wofford back to back weeks to open the season. Obviously, the Furman game will be big. That one's October 24th down in Charleston this year, and then they have to come back up to the Upstate in November and take on the Tigers of Clemson.
Yeah, that game probably won't be too close. So
Yeah.
it'll be a nice paycheck, I'm sure.
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
sure. Wonder if will that be now? See, last year they had a purple out for the Wofford game at Clemson. So, well, this year it'll be Military Appreciation Day, right?
Should be. Clemson should wear the all purple again.
And then they'll just blast them on Military Appreciation Day.
Maybe they'll let them score and then just run away with it. Give them a little bit of hope there.
Why let them score?
Right. I'll probably, if they do let the Citadel score, I probably will scream at the TV. But that's a discussion we can have on another day. All right, John. Furman, the hometown team here in Greenville. It was a good year, especially early on last year. Furman probably could have been and probably should have been undefeated up into the Citadel game, where they almost beat Georgia State and almost beat Virginia Tech on the road, two FBS schools. And then, after the Citadel game, it was almost kind of like that Furman offense kind of lost some steam a little bit. It almost kind of felt like the life got sucked out of that Furman offense after that Citadel game. They did end up finishing 6-2 overall, 8-5, made it to the playoffs where they just got absolutely eviscerated by Austin Peay. But a good year nonetheless.
Yeah.
Young team from a year ago coming back. They can build on that success a year ago. I think they'll be ready to play in some of these bigger games. And, they have this mentality. I think they'll have a mentality now that maybe they can win some bigger games, the Wofford games, the Citadel games, things like that. So 2020 Furman, John.
Well, I think if like Coach Hendricks said, if you just told him before the year he'd go into the year with two redshirt freshman quarterbacks and win 8 games in the regular season, that's impressive. For one thing, I think that the way they played against Georgia State and Virginia Tech, it was sort of an indicator of how good Darren Granger could be.
Yeah.
When things were clicking on all cylinders for him, at some point, and I don't know what it was, but I think the East Tennessee State game was probably the turning point, even though Furman won that game. ETSU did some different things defensively to maybe open the eyes of several, defenses around the league.
Yeah.
And I think that, being a younger quarterback, that it's harder to, recognize certain things unless the only way you're going to get experience is repetition and seeing that stuff over and over again. So I feel good about this year from the respect that he had a lot thrown at him in the second half of the year because people were trying to figure out how to stop him. And I heard that, I think it was the Citadel, somebody from the Citadel had told me that their defensive coordinator had keyed on something about him putting his foot down to when he was going to throw the ball, and there was a difference to when he was going to run it. So just little things like that that were picked up on. But obviously he was he was tough to deal with for Virginia Tech and Georgia State. And that Georgia State game, I mean, he could have done pretty much what he wanted to. The only problem was Furman had trouble stopping Georgia State's offense, who was, even better. So, I feel good about this upcoming season. I think outside linebacker is is kind of a position they really addressed, the coaching staff, and they'll move Elijah McCoy to Bandit, and he'll split time with Adrian Hope, who is an All-American, obviously, but you're only going to have Adrian Hope in a certain amount of plays because he's a pass rushing threat. So
Yeah.
he'll be in, and then I guess McCoy will be on more running plays. But it's certainly a change. You'll be taking Elijah McCoy out of the middle of the defense and putting him in, more on a perimeter role. And, a big question marks, obviously, in the secondary, where I think Furman probably graduated more guys. Brian Oakey was a senior, and I think he'll be a guy that's missed. I think Trapp will be a guy that's missed just because of his speed, and his ability on special teams to do some things. So, I think cornerback will be a position I'll watch on defense, but the defensive line should be decent. They had some injuries there last year, but some guys are back, and I think offensive line should be really good, among the best in the league, and they call it running back U for a reason. 4 running backs are back. Devin Wynn is, kind of headlines those guys, but you got Corey Watkins, who's considered one of the fastest guys on the team, and then you've got Wayne Anderson Jr., who had the big touchdown against Wofford.
Yeah.
Obviously, the guy from Texas, Furman didn't get a lot of guys from there, so
yeah.
He'll be a more featured back, and as well as Devin Abrams, a guy that we saw against Chattanooga, had a big day. Obviously, given a push by Hamp Sisson at quarterback in there at the time, and I go back to defensive side of the ball. I think one of the bigger players that I think will have an outstanding season will be Travis Blackshear at cornerback.
Oh, yeah.
I just really think he's a good player. I think he's going to have a big year.
They start off the year, we've talked about it, going up against Wofford, a game that, that was their I think it was their next to last regular season game last year, because they played Point.
Yeah, they played Point.
Yeah, at the end of the year. So Furman's had some time to kind of stew over that game. They, we'll see Wofford at home. They're in Paladin Stadium to open up the year. Then they've got Charleston Southern. They'll head down to North Charleston, take on them. And then it's off to Knoxville to take on Tennessee and take on the Vols, who got better last year. But the beginning of the year last year,
a nightmare.
Tennessee was awful, man. So who knows? Maybe Furman can go up to Knoxville and pull out a win, and then the Citadel game in October down in Charleston. Just some of the games to watch for the Paladins.
Yeah, I think so. The funny thing about Tennessee is they may, if Pruitt if that game's close and Coach Pruitt actually holds his blood pressure down in that game, I would be surprised. It's just funny seeing him get on to his quarterbacks last year. Garantano, I guess it was. And
yeah.
So I guess by saying that, I will say this. If he's getting on to Garantano a lot in the second half, that's probably a good sign that Furman's in the football game.
Yeah. So that'll be one to watch for. That one Saturday, September 19th. All right, John, we've gone through everybody. Let's break down who we think what the league's going to look like. Stack. We'll go from bottom. We'll go start at number 9, work our way up to the top. At number 9, John, who do you got?
Unfortunately I love my fans in Cullowhee, but I have Western Carolina as my 9th team in the SoCon, and I just really feel like it's a year that quarterback for them is going to be big. I think that I want to say that the offense will, with Jones having more experience, that the offense will look a little bit better, but I'm just not sure that it will be like it was with Tyree Adams, and that's my concern. I think they'll be better on defense. I just think they're going to struggle, and but on the same hand, they've got enough athletes and players to break into the top half of the SoCon. That's how crazy all this is. But I just think the inexperience at quarterback will be costly, and I had them ninth.
Yeah, I agree. Western. I've got Western at 9 as well. I just think there's too many question marks, too many unknowns about Western, especially defensively. How, where they were a year ago. How quickly can they get better? I mean, they did improve at the end of last year, but are they going to be improved enough to, really be meaningful come 2020? And then, like you said, Tyree Adams there. What's the offense going to look like with a new quarterback? So, yeah, so just some different unknowns. A lot of too many unknowns for me to move them up anywhere else. They did have a disappointing year. Not a year that they would have wanted. Um, we'll see, but as of right now, yeah, Western there at 9. I did move ETSU up. They finished the year last. I think they'll move up just a little bit. I'm not sure about the offense with ETSU, especially with the quarterback. We talked about it earlier about the quarterback play. I think the defense may be good enough, but I'm just a little concerned with ETSU's offense. I put them at 8.
Yeah, not only that, I think losing the players they lost on the defensive side of the ball. When you look at Nasir Player, who was preseason SoCon Defensive Player of the Year, and then you lose a guy like Artavius Smith, who was, I think was tied for the league in interceptions last year. I think those two big kind of all-America type players on the defensive side of the ball. And then you got, still question marks at quarterback coming into the year. Will it be Kay Weldon? Will it be Tyler Riddell? Who will be the starter? And then, the two guys that you really have as the constants really in this offense are Quay Holmes and Jacob Sailors, who, will be going into, their junior years now, and guys that are fully capable of being able to lead this offense, but having to shoulder it year like they did last year, I don't think that's a good recipe for success. So I had them 8th as well. But here's an interesting thing: in the 7 of the 8 SoCon games that ETSU was in last year, only one of them was decided by double digits, and that was a loss to Wofford.
Yeah, like I said, the defense was not the problem last year
Right.
for ETSU. It was all offense. So if they can get that fixed, I think they'll be okay. But it's just too many questions on that side of the ball. All right, 7, John.
I had the Mercer Bears. A new coach coming in. I think they have enough talent to finish higher, but you don't know really the status of Robert Riddle under center. They've got some improving to do on the defensive side of the ball. I think they were 117th out of like 124 teams in the FCS last year. They had to find a remedy for that, and they lose one of their bigger defensive standouts in Dorian Cathcart, who kind of anchored the defensive line and the defense as a whole. So he'll have to be replaced, but they have some weapons on offense, as we mentioned earlier. Yasha McKee is one of them. David Durden, obviously the receiver, on the other receiver. So Drew Cronick has got a tough job to do, but I think he's got one that he has enough players to where they could even be a dark horse and finish on up the ladder in the SoCon food chain, so to speak.
Yeah, Mercer. That's a pretty good spot to put him. I had Mercer at 6. I put VMI at 7. With the loss of Ramsey, we talked about it. Yes, Udinski is a great quarterback, and Udinski, and with his play at quarterback, is going to keep VMI in football games. But can their defense make enough stops to win them football games is my concern. That was a big issue that we saw in several games last year, like the Robert Morris game. I think VMI was going to have – I think they can build off the success they had last year. I'm a little concerned that maybe they might take just a little step back So I put them in at 7, and then had Mercer at 6.
Okay. Um, yeah, I had VMI at 6. They were a team. They're a team that I think, with the quarterback as they have, and Reese Udinsky, who went 368 passes without an interception last year. I think if he can make the same good decisions offensively this year, if just a slight improvement defensively, then they could be even better,
Yeah,
despite the loss of Ramsey. And um, I think they have the receivers, probably the best receiving core in the league. I think a guy like Leroy Thomas can be a game breaker at wide receiver. But like you said, I think it all hinges on what they do on defense,
yeah,
and how they gave up a bunch of yards, and I don't
yeah.
remember how many per game, but rushing defense was a real concern for them in each game last year. And that'll be something I'll be watching this year. But I think 6 is probably fair for VMI.
Yeah,
Maybe could finish even higher if that defense gets some momentum and gets a little confidence.
I agree. I agree. I put Mercer at 6 simply because guys like you mentioned, Durden. If Riddle is ready to go, if he's ready to play healthy, I think that the weapons that he's got on offense gives Mercer a little bit of an edge. I think the defense is a little bit better for Mercer than VMI as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why personally I give Mercer just a little bit of a better edge right now. And then at 5, I've got the Bulldogs from Sanford, and we'll see what they can do. They pretty much finished right in the middle of the pack last year. I got them kind of right there in the middle again this year.
Yeah, that's actually who I had number 5 is Sanford. I'll be interested to see if Liam Welch, who the quarterback is, if Welch was playing, later last year because of injuries to Oladokin, or if he's planning on playing both quarterbacks. But
Yeah,
either way, I think there's some talent on the offensive side of the ball. I think I look at guys like Montreal Washington, a talented wide receiver, and a guy that you can use in a lot of different situations, even as a running threat. Jay Stanton's a good running back, a good freshman running back. AJ Toney was a guy that had the 67-yard touchdown, I guess it was, to kind of enable that game to go to overtime against the Citadel, and they eventually ended up winning in quadruple overtime. So a lot of offensive weapons.
yeah,
Again,
yeah.
defensively, Sanford was exposed at times last year. Furman being one of those games to where, you know, guys like Devin Wynn just had a field day, both running and catching the football. But there is some talent there. I think on the defensive side of the ball for them, linebacker John Staten's a good player. He had a game last year. I think it was against Mercer, actually. He had 22 tackles. So a guy that you can kind of build a defense around. And,
Yeah,
I think the problem is not Sanford's always been very good at recruiting and finding talent. For me, it's just maturity and parlaying that talent into winning some meaningful games, which
right.
really they even a couple of years ago they had trouble doing. Even though that they beat Furman at Furman, and then Furman turns around and gets that win last year. One of the weird series in the SoCon, if you look at it, is Samford and Wofford, and Samford's actually won, I think, the past 4 games against Wofford. So that'll be interesting.
Speaking of Wofford, this may be a surprise, John, but because of losing some guys on, especially the offensive side of the ball, like Joe Newman, you mentioned some defensive guys gone as well. I've actually got the defending champs at 4 to
Wow.
start the year. Not to say that I don't think Wofford will probably. I think Wofford probably may be better than that, but at this moment, I just think Wofford's probably the fourth best, at least from what I can, gather. We don't really know a whole lot about this Wofford team yet, what the quarterback situation's going to look like,
Right.
what the offensive style is going to look like, really. I mean, I'm sure they'll stick to that more Wofford style offense, but like you mentioned, they may want to open up the pass game a little bit more than they have in years past. So we'll kind of see. Again, Wofford, to me, a little bit too many unknowns to put them a little higher than 4.
Yeah, Wofford's got some talent around whoever
Yeah,
the starter is on offense.
right, exactly.
I would say a guy like Demarie Van Cleve, the running back, could be kind of an X factor type guy for them. But for number 4, I actually had Chattanooga.
Okay.
Um, Now I say that, and that I know last year it may seem disappointing that I would have them, close. Well, actually, they finished third last year,
Yeah.
I guess. So they were 5-3 in the league. But I replacing a quarterback again and Nick Tiano, and I feel like though now that I know that Cole Copeland is back, that they could actually break into the top 3. And they're a team that already has an established running threat and Ilam Ford, who I think is only going to get better
Yeah.
as his career goes along. If he can stay healthy and that knee injury doesn't set him back too much this year. But I felt like one of their issues a little bit last year was they lacked that big play with receiver. They have some guys capable of making plays in the passing game, but I think that'll be like with East Tennessee, that'll be an area to watch with them this year. I think they'll be better on defense. I think is it Dowdell, the defensive back, is an all American type player that returns for them, and he's also been very good in the past in the return game. So he'll be back to kind of anchor the secondary, and then Ty Bowick's a good linebacker, and we talked about Devonta Maxwell, who I think is one of the best run stopping defensive linemen in the league, and really takes up a lot of room. And so the defense has got a chance to be a lot better. And while I have them 4th, it wouldn't shock me at all if they finished in the top 3.
All right, who you got 3?
I've got Wofford.
Okay.
So, like we said, they've got to make a decision on quarterback. I feel like the favorite, in my opinion, is probably Peyton Derrick, the transfer from Appalachian State. They've got a lot of weapons around him, and I think that works well to for offensive coordinator Wade Lang. I think guys like Demarie Van Cleve that I mentioned, T.J. Luther is a wide receiver that's a big play guy, but you can also use him as a halfback in the running game, and you can use him in a lot of different ways. Jaquez Allen is a good halfback and really catches the ball well out of the backfield, kind of a speedy, low to the ground runner. So, and then you got Nathan Walker, who's back at as the feature back in that offense, in that wing bone offense. So it'll all be predicated on if they're able to compete for a championship or not, as far as how those first 2 games go, and then obviously how the new quarterback is able to adjust to the offensive play calling.
All right, so we just flipped our 3s and 4s. I put Chattanooga up at 3. I think Ilam Ford's probably one of the best, if not the best, offensive player in the league. And he's like you said, he's only going to get better. He just had a fantastic freshman year a year ago.
He was unstoppable against
Furman. Yeah, absolutely. And if they can get a passing game to kind of mesh with that running game, I think that offense is going to be pretty. Is going to be a headache to most defenses. Last year defensively wasn't all that great for Chattanooga, but I do think they'll probably be a little bit better on that side of the ball this year. But to me, the big thing was I think the schedule sets up nicely for Chattanooga. Just by looking, they've got BMI at home, they've got Wofford at home, they've got Mercer and Samford at home. So they've got I think the schedule pretty at least the conference schedule sort of sets up a little nicely for the
Hmm.
Mocs.
Yeah, I like the way it works out as well. And you know, I think the Mocs are a team, that are gaining momentum again.
Yeah,
Where there was a couple years after Russ Huesman left to go to Richmond, where you felt like they were looking for an identity, and now having one of their own back in Rusty Wright, I think they have that identity kind of established again.
number 2, John.
I had Furman. This is a tough one for me because obviously Furman, I feel like, is capable of winning the league. They're more than
Yeah,
capable of winning the league. I feel like they were actually a really good defense last year, all things considered. Because if you look at I think the scoring defense, they led the league in scoring defense, and
yeah,
they gave up some yards against the run, but I think moving Elijah McCoy to the outside to split time at Bandit was a good move during the spring, whatever spring practice they were allowed to have. But
yeah,
that's going to be, a good move. But one of the things that was concerning is the secondary. They gave up 5 touchdown passes in the which is good for Darren Granger and Ham Sisson. But 5 of them were over 50 yards in
yeah.
excessive. So that's something I'm a little bit concerned about as far as going forward. But I feel confident that Travis Blackshear on one side is going to be a lockdown type corner with his speed and just his aggressiveness. He's very physical, very much of very mature for being a redshirt sophomore player. So I think he'll have a big year. But safety's a little bit of a question mark. So we'll see what happens. But I think this team overall, with Granger or Sisson or both at quarterback, is going to be a better football team than the one last year.
Yeah.
And I would challenge. I would say that Furman has as deep a backfield as anyone in the FCS.
I mean, I agree. I wanted really badly to put Furman at 1. I just couldn't do it. Young team of
Do
year.
I hope they? Yeah, I hope.
Yeah, do I hope they do? Yes, but I just couldn't do it for our preseason rankings. They were a young team a year ago. They've had a lot of maturation. They've had to kind of work through now. I think I agree. They're going to be a much better football team this year than they were a year ago. They're going to. I think I said it earlier. I feel like they're going to be able to, in some of those tougher games, find a way to win those games. Whereas last year, it was, it didn't kind of go their way in a number of games last year. I think they can maybe reverse that a little bit. However, I think consistency on the offensive side of the ball for Furman is going to be big this year because I felt like times last year where the offense just kind of lulled sometimes, and it just kind of went back and forth. Darren Granger would have a really good game, and then it was almost like the Citadel game. He kind of disappeared the rest of the year after that. A little bit more consistency on the offense. The defense, I'm really not concerned about. I know they've lost some guys on the back end, but I'm really not concerned about the defensive side of the ball at all from Furman. I think they'll carry over that same aggressiveness that they had a year ago.
Front seven's pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Furman's going to be right there. I really do. I think it's going to come down between them and the Citadel, who I had at 1. I just think the experience play of Brandon Rainey coming back. You add Alex Ramsey. They've got a very good defense down there in Charleston as well. I just think the Bulldogs, on paper at this moment, seem to have that little slightly better edge than the Paladins.
I agree. I think the Citadel, with the experience they bring back with Rainey at quarterback, I think, and the guys they already have back in the backfield. You mentioned Alex Ramsey, Clay Harris, the guys that, really, and then what I think is one of the better offensive lines in the league.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you couple that with the defense that brings back a guy like Sean Thomas Faulkner, a guy like Willie Eubanks III, who is, I think maybe the best player on defense in the league. I think they're a very mature ball club and a very a team that's been through a lot of wars together over the past few years, and obviously beating an FBS, even though Georgia Tech wasn't very good last year. I think that does it. That does something for a team. To beat someone like that at a higher level, and it makes them a tougher team to beat in the long run. And I think just because of the maturity and what you have and Brandon Rainey at quarterback, that's why I had them number one. And I think that game on October 24th will be the game for. Much like maybe the Wofford game was last year for the Southern Conference title. Because if things go right, I mean, you could see both of those teams being undefeated in the league coming into that game. Yeah. So,
absolutely. So we've got a couple things where we disagree, but pretty much we pretty have a similar idea of what the league's going to look like. John, I'm excited. 2020.
Both of those teams go to the playoffs too.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Whoever, regardless of who wins, I think both those teams end up getting a spot in the playoffs. Excited about 2020, the season. Hopefully everything plays out just like we need it to, and we play some football come late August, early September, and looking forward to another exciting year of Southern Conference football, man.
Yeah, me too. I can't wait, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, man. Next week, let's get into the ACC. We'll go up to the FBS level and break down the ACC. Got our our Clemson Tigers. We'll talk about a little bit and kind of talk about the Atlantic Coast Conference as a whole. And maybe in a couple of weeks we'll get into the SEC and some other conferences like that as well. But we'll definitely do the ACC next week. Sound good?
Sounds great, man.
Hey, man, always a pleasure. Enjoyed it. This has been The Spread. Thanks for watching The Spread podcast. You've just seen the highlights from this week's episode. Go on over to SoundCloud.com and you can listen to the entire episode absolutely free. Just search The Spread with Cameron Tarrant. Thanks for listening.